The alarm went off at 5:30 in the morning, slicing through the silence like a siren in the dark. James blinked at the ceiling, dazed, half dreaming, half regretting his decision to set it so early. The sound grated on his nerves. He reached out, slapped the button, and lay still. The room was cold. The faint orange glow from the streetlight leaked through the curtains, painting the walls in a dull, sleepy haze. For a moment, he stayed there, feeling the comfort of the duvet cocoon around him. He could almost hear his mind whispering, 5 more minutes won't hurt. But he knew that voice too well, the voice that had robbed him of progress for years. It had whispered the same thing yesterday, and the day before that, and 100 mornings before that. The same voice that had kept him comfortable and ordinary. He turned his head and stared at the clock again. 5:32. Every minute felt like a small decision, a tug of war between who he was and who he wanted to be. The air in the room felt sharp against his skin as he pushed the covers away. For a brief second, he hesitated. His muscles were stiff, his eyes heavy. The warmth of the bed called him back like a friend who never judged him for quitting. But he swung his legs over the edge anyway. His feet touched the cold floor. The shock of it jolted him awake. He sat there, elbows on his knees, staring at the floorboards. Just get up, he muttered under his breath. Just move. It wasn't motivation that got him moving. Motivation was unreliable, fragile, it came and went like the weather. What pushed him out of bed was something quieter, tougher, discipline. The choice to act, not because he felt like it, but because he said he would. He pulled on his hoodie, laced up his trainers, and stepped out the door. The morning bit at his face, his breath forming clouds in the frosty air. The streets were empty, except for the soft hum of distant traffic and the rhythmic flicker of streetlights still clinging to the night. He began jogging, each step crunching softly against the pavement. His body protested instantly. His lungs burned, his legs felt like lead, and his chest tightened against the cold. Every step felt wrong at first. His brain screamed for him to stop. It's too early, it argued. You could run later. Just go home. But he didn't listen. He kept his eyes fixed ahead, focused on the rhythm of his breath, inhale, exhale, step, step, step. The silence of the dawn was both lonely and peaceful. He passed the small park at the end of the road, its trees standing still in the dim light. The swings swayed gently in the wind, creaking like whispers in the dark. The smell of wet grass filled the air, and for a moment, something inside him settled. This was his time. No noise, no distractions, just him against his excuses. Half a mile in, he felt the first real wave of fatigue. His calves ached, his lungs gasped, and a dull stitch pulsed under his ribs. He slowed down, his mind throwing him every reason to quit. You're tired, you've done enough, you're not built for this. But he remembered why he started. He remembered the promise he'd made to himself, to stop breaking his own word. To be the kind of person who showed up even when it hurt. That thought lit something small but powerful inside him. He tightened his jaw and kept going. The road stretched out endlessly ahead, winding through empty streets. He could see his reflection faintly in shop windows as he passed, a lone figure, hoodie pulled up, face flushed with effort. He didn't look like a champion. He looked ordinary, but that's what discipline really was, doing the extraordinary through ordinary moments. No one cheering, no one clapping, just effort and silence. As he ran, his thoughts wandered. He thought about all the times he'd quit too soon, projects unfinished, gym memberships wasted, dreams postponed. Always waiting for motivation to arrive, as if it was some magical spark that would light his way. But now he understood the truth. Motivation starts the engine, but discipline keeps it running. He turned a corner, the cold air cutting across his face. A few lights flickered in nearby houses, early risers like him, perhaps getting ready for work, maybe chasing their own quiet goals. The thought made him feel less alone. He wasn't just running, he was building something invisible: consistency, resilience, self-trust. By the time he reached the final stretch, the horizon had begun to shift from black to blue. The first hint of sunrise crept into the sky, washing the rooftops in soft amber light. The city began to stir, a bus rumbled by, a dog barked in the distance. He was still running, slower now, but steady. The pain in his legs had turned into something almost comforting. Each step was proof that he'd won the first battle of the day. When he finally stopped, sweat dripped down his face, his breath came in heavy bursts, and his body ached from head to toe. But beneath the exhaustion, there was pride. Not the loud, boastful kind, the quiet, steady kind that settles in your chest like warmth. He stood there for a moment, hands on his knees, staring at the pale morning sky. He realized the run itself wasn't the victory. The real victory had happened the moment he'd swung his legs out of bed. The hardest part of discipline is always the start, the moment when comfort whispers and you choose discomfort instead. As he walked back home, the city was fully awake. People hurried down the streets, cars honked, the day had begun. He passed by the same shop windows, now glowing bright. He caught his reflection again, tired eyes, flushed face, but a small, undeniable smile. He looked like someone who had kept a promise. When he stepped back into his flat, the warmth wrapped around him. He took off his trainers and collapsed on the sofa, feeling the ache in every muscle. He looked at the clock, 6:15. The world was just waking up, but he had already conquered his first challenge. He leaned back and whispered to himself, "That's how it starts. One decision at a time." It wasn't easy. It never would be. But he understood now that self-discipline wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic change. It was about doing the small, difficult things, over and over, until they became part of who you are. The alarm would ring again tomorrow, and his mind would try to bargain with him again. But he'd be ready, because every morning he chose discipline, he was becoming stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. And that, he realized, was how ordinary people become extraordinary. One cold morning, one small victory at a time. It had been weeks since James first dragged himself out of bed before sunrise. What had started as a reluctant jog through the cold had slowly become part of him, a ritual that grounded his mornings and gave shape to his days. He no longer fought the alarm, he simply rose when it rang, as if his body now understood that discipline wasn't a punishment but a choice. The mirror reflected the change too, a leaner face, sharper eyes, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. But discipline, he would soon learn, is always tested when comfort comes calling. It was Friday evening. The week had been long, filled with deadlines and meetings, and James could feel the fatigue sitting heavy on his shoulders. As he packed up his things at work, his phone buzzed on the desk. A message from his mates flashed across the screen, "Drinks tonight, mate. Everyone's heading to the Crown at 8. You in?" He stared at it for a moment. He hadn't been out in weeks, always choosing early nights and quiet mornings over loud laughter and late hours. A part of him missed it, the banter, the jokes, the easy company of friends who had known him for years. But another part of him hesitated. His trainers sat by the door at home, waiting for the morning. His plan was already set: up at 5, run 6 miles, then breakfast and stretch. He'd been consistent for almost a month, and the results were beginning to show, not just in his body, but in his mind. Every morning run was a quiet victory, proof that he could keep promises to himself. He leaned back in his chair and sighed. "It's just one night," he told himself. "What's the harm?" On the way home, the inner debate raged on. The streets were alive with the Friday buzz, people laughing outside cafes, music spilling from pubs, the smell of chips drifting through the air. It all felt inviting, easy. He could already hear his friends teasing him if he said no. "Come on, James, 1 pint won't kill you." When he reached his flat, he tossed his bag aside and sat on the sofa, staring at his running shoes. They seemed to stare back at him, quiet and patient. His mind spun in circles. "You've worked hard. You deserve a break. One night won't undo everything." But deep down, he knew the truth: it was never just one night. One skipped run became 2, one small compromise became a pattern. Discipline eroded slowly, one excuse at a time. Still, he didn't want to isolate himself completely. Balance, he thought, was part of the journey too. So, he texted back, "I'll come for an hour, but I've got a run early morning." When he arrived at the Crown, laughter and music poured out into the chilly night. Inside, the pub was warm and alive, the air thick with the smell of ale and chatter. His mates cheered when they saw him. "Look who's finally decided to join the living," one of them shouted, clapping him on the back. James grinned, easing into the familiar rhythm. The conversation flowed, pints clinked, and for a while, he forgot about his morning plans. But as the clock ticked past 11, a quiet reminder stirred in his chest. He glanced at his watch, 11:07. His mates were ordering another round, laughing about old times. "Stay for one more," someone said. It's Friday, you can run tomorrow afternoon. That voice, the same one that used to whisper, 5 more minutes, in the morning, returned, smooth and persuasive. What's the rush? You've earned this. He could feel the pull, that familiar temptation to let go, to choose comfort over commitment. He took a slow sip from his glass and then placed it down. Nah, lads, he said with a faint smile. I'm heading off, got a run in the morning. The table went quiet for a second, then laughter erupted. You're mad, one said. Running at dawn on a Saturday. Who does that? James just smiled. Someone who doesn't want to start over again, he said. As he stepped out into the cold night air, he felt something powerful, not pride, exactly, but peace. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about keeping the promise he'd made to himself. The streets were empty, the laughter fading behind him as he walked home. The temptation had been loud, but discipline had been louder. When the alarm buzzed the next morning, his head was clear, his body heavy with sleep but not regret. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and smiled faintly. The bed called to him, soft and inviting, but he didn't hesitate this time. He got up, pulled on his hoodie, and laced his shoes. The first few steps outside were slow, his muscles protesting, but the cool air quickly sharpened his senses. The city was still asleep as he ran through the quiet streets. The same pub he'd left hours ago stood silent now, the laughter replaced by stillness. He felt a strange satisfaction pass through him, the knowledge that while the world slept, he was building something. Not fame, not money, but character. His legs grew heavier halfway through, and his breath came in bursts, but he kept going. Each stride was a reminder of last night's choice. Every time his foot hit the pavement, it said, I am in control. I decide who I become. By the time the sun began to rise, painting the horizon gold, he felt alive in a way no night out could ever make him feel. His heart pounded, his body ached, but his mind was clear, calm, steady. He realized then that self-discipline wasn't about denying pleasure, it was about choosing long-term pride over short-term comfort. When he finally reached home, sweat dripping down his forehead, he took a deep breath and looked at his reflection in the hallway mirror. He didn't look heroic or extraordinary, just tired and fulfilled. He whispered to himself, this is what winning feels like, quiet, simple, and earned. And in that moment, James understood something most people never do. Success doesn't happen in front of a crowd. It happens in silence, in the moments when no one sees the choices you make. It happens when you turn down what feels good now, to build what feels right later. The morning of the marathon arrived cold and clear. The streets were lined with barriers, the air thick with anticipation. Thousands of runners stretched, jogged, and adjusted their numbers, each lost in their own thoughts. James stood among them, hands tucked into his hoodie pockets, heart pounding. Months of early mornings, quiet battles, and lonely runs had led to this. Yet, standing there, he realized that the real race had never been against others, it had always been against himself. He adjusted his earphones, glanced at the road ahead, and felt a familiar calm settle over him. He'd imagined this moment during every cold dawn, every painful stride. Now it was here, not as a fantasy, but as a test of everything he'd built through discipline. Around him, runners chatted nervously, but James stayed silent, eyes fixed on the horizon. The whistle blew, followed by the sharp crack of the starting gun. The crowd surged forward like a single wave. James moved with them, his feet finding their rhythm on the tarmac. The roar of cheering spectators filled the air, but it faded quickly in his mind. Within minutes, all that existed was his breath, the sound of trainers hitting the pavement, and the endless road ahead. The first few miles felt effortless. His body moved like it remembered what to do. Every step was a reminder of those early mornings, the cold, the doubt, the temptation to quit. He remembered each of them vividly. The mornings when rain lashed against the windows and the wind cut across his face. The nights when he had said no to parties, no to comfort, no to the easy way out. All of it had led here. By mile 8, the crowd had thinned. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by silence and strain. His legs ached, a dull fire spreading through his calves. Sweat stung his eyes, and his breathing grew heavier. For a moment, the old voice crept back, slow down. You've done enough, just walk for a bit. He almost laughed to himself. That voice was still there, still trying to pull him back, but he wasn't the same man anymore. He tightened his fists, straightened his back, and whispered under his breath, keep going. People began to drop pace around him, some stopping for water, others stretching tired muscles. James focused on his rhythm, steady, relentless, unbroken. The city moved past him in flashes, the river glinting in the sunlight, the echo of footsteps through tunnels, the blur of strangers clapping along the route. Somewhere in the crowd, someone shouted his name. He smiled faintly, though he didn't know who it was. Maybe no one, maybe just his own mind cheering him on. When he reached mile 20, pain became something constant, almost familiar. His body screamed for rest, but his heart was louder. He thought about that first morning when he'd forced himself out of bed, how hard it had been to move, to start. Compared to that, this was nothing. The hardest part had never been running 20 miles, it had been convincing himself to begin. As he approached the final stretch, the crowd thickened again. The finish line shimmered in the distance, bright banners fluttering in the wind. Every fiber of his body ached. His vision blurred with sweat and exhaustion, but he kept pushing. The cheers grew louder, names and encouragements blurring into one long roar. He felt tears sting his eyes, though he didn't know if it was from the pain or from pride. When he finally crossed the line, he didn't raise his arms or shout in victory. He simply stopped, bent forward, hands on his knees, breathing in sharp, ragged bursts. The world around him spun, flashes of color, sound, and joy. Someone draped a medal over his neck, its cool metal pressing against his chest. He stared at it, not as a trophy, but as a symbol. It wasn't made of metal, not really, it was made of every decision, every sacrifice, every moment he'd chosen discipline over comfort. He straightened up slowly and looked around. People were hugging, crying, laughing. He smiled quietly to himself, feeling a warmth rise within him that had nothing to do with the sun. This was what discipline created, not just a result, but a transformation. He walked towards the edge of the course, found a quiet spot, and sat down. His body was wrecked, but his mind was still. He thought about how far he'd come, from the man who couldn't get out of bed to the one who had just conquered a marathon. Not because he was special, but because he'd learned the simplest, hardest truth: success is built in silence, one decision at a time. He looked at the medal again, the light glinting off it, and whispered, "This isn't the reward." The reward was becoming the kind of person who could earn it. As the cheers continued around him and the city moved on, James sat there, tired, content, and changed, not because he finished a race, but because he had finally mastered himself.